Welcome to a tactical breakdown of the battle that shattered early illusions of a quick conflict. The First Battle of Bull Run on July 21, 1861. This map illustrates the opening major clash of the American Civil War. On the left, we see McDowell's flanking maneuver, where Union forces, marked in blue, attempted a sweeping arc to outflank the enemy line. However, waiting across the Bull Run waterway is Beauregard and Johnston's defense. Anchored by strategic positions near the Stone Bridge and Henry House Hill, the Confederate forces, marked in red, stood ready to blunt the assault, turning a hopeful Union advance into a sobering reality check for both sides. Let's examine the broader chessboard of the conflict. The Union objective was clear. General Irvin McDowell marched from Washington, D.C. toward Manassas Junction, aiming to sever the Confederate rail line to Richmond and end the rebellion in 90 days. Blocking his path, General P.G.T. Beauregard entrenched Confederate forces along the Bull Run Creek line to protect that vital railroad hub. But the critical wildcard lies to the west, the Shenandoah Lifeline. Utilizing the Manassas Gap Railroad, Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston slipped away from Union forces in the valley, rushing 10,000 crucial reinforcements directly to Beauregard's aid, shifting the strategic balance of the impending battle. Now, let's look at the numbers and realities facing the opposing forces. On paper, McDowell commands roughly 35,000 Union troops against Beauregard and Johnston's combined 32,000 Confederates, though both sides ultimately engaged around 18,000 men. Troop quality tells a story of mutual inexperience. The Union fields green, 90-day volunteers unaccustomed to discipline, while the Confederacy relies on hastily gathered state militias equally untested in large-scale combat. Strategically, the Union seeks to launch a complex offensive to crush the rebellion swiftly, relying logistically on overland wagon supplies from Washington. Conversely, the Confederates aim to defend fixed creek fords and counterattack, holding a distinct logistical edge through the unprecedented use of strategic rail transport to unite their armies. Let's examine the initial battle plans of both commanders, highlighting the stark contrast between strategic intent and reality. On the left, we see McDowell's intended Union plan. Operating from Centerville, he aimed to launch a diversionary feint at the Stone Bridge while executing his main, sweeping flanking maneuver further north via Sudley Ford to catch the enemy off guard. On the right, Beauregard harbored his own aggressive designs. His intended plan called for a strong Confederate defense along the Bull Run Creek line, coupled with an offensive strike from Blackburn's Ford to cut off the Union rear. Ultimately, however, this complex Confederate offensive was abandoned, shifting the battlefield reality entirely to a desperate defense against McDowell's incoming flank. Let's trace the grueling opening hours of the Union offensive, known as the Flank March. The movement begins early at 2:30 a.m., as 12,000 Union men under Generals Hunter and Heintzelman set out from Centerville. Progress is agonizingly slow, bogged down by narrow cart paths and inexperienced troops breaking ranks. By 5:30 a.m., the silence shatters. Union artillerist Peter Conover Haines fires a massive 30-pounder Parrott rifle shell over the Stone Bridge, striking the Van Pelt House and officially opening the battle. It isn't until 9:30 a.m. that the exhausted Union flanking column finally arrives at Sudley Ford. Hours behind schedule, their sluggish march has cost them dearly, stripping away the critical element of total surprise. As morning progresses, we enter a critical window, 9:30 to 11:30 a.m., where the Union flank is discovered and confronted. First, look at the observation. From Signal Hill 8 miles away, Confederate Captain E.P. Alexander spots the sun glinting off Union brass near Sudley Ford. He sends history's first combat wig-wag signal flag message. Look out your left, you are turned. This brings us to the pivot. Armed with this vital warning, Confederate Colonel Nathan Evans acts decisively. Leaving a token force at the Stone Bridge, he pivots his small command of 900 troops north to Matthews Hill, bravely rushing to block the massive onslaught of 20,000 advancing Union troops and buying precious time for the Confederacy. From 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., the battle intensifies during the fierce collision at Matthews Hill. At 10 a.m., Burnside's Union troops collide directly with Evans' small, dug-in force. To buy critical time, Major Robert O. Wheat's Louisiana Tigers launch a ferocious delaying countercharge into the cornfields, engaging in brutal, close-quarters combat with Bowie knives and .54 caliber muskets. However, the tide turns decisively at 11:30 a.m. when Union Colonel William T. Sherman crosses the unguarded Poplar Ford. His brigade strikes the Confederate right flank, causing the Southern line to shatter. The broken Confederate forces are routed, retreating southward toward the high ground of Henry House Hill, leaving the Union victorious in this opening phase. At midday, a literal and visual fog of war descended on the battlefield, the uniform chaos. Contrary to popular belief, blue and gray did not strictly separate North and South in this first major clash. For instance, the Union's 2nd Wisconsin fought in militia gray, while many Confederates wore blue or civilian clothes. Adding to the confusion, the Union's 11th New York Infantry, the Fire Zouaves, wore conspicuous bright red shirts and baggy trousers. This utter visual chaos led directly to catastrophic friendly fire incidents and fatal tactical hesitations. The disaster on this battlefield ultimately prompted the creation of the distinct red, white, and blue St. Andrew's Cross Confederate battle flag to prevent future confusion. From 12 p.m. to 2 p.m., the conflict reaches its critical turning point during the stand on Henry Hill. At 12 p.m., Generals Johnston and Beauregard ride among the routing troops retreating from Matthews Hill, desperately trying to reform their shattered line. Answering the crisis, General Thomas J. Jackson arrives with 2,500 Virginians. He establishes a formidable defensive position, deploying 13 artillery pieces on the crest while utilizing the hill's reverse slope to shield his infantry from direct fire. Observing this stubborn defense, General Barnard B. rallies his own men with the iconic exclamation, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." Amidst this fierce crossfire, the battle also claims a tragic civilian cost as 85-year-old widow Judith Carter Henry is mortally wounded inside her home. Next, we witness a tactical catastrophe on the slopes of Henry Hill, the artillery blunder. In a fateful decision, Union captains Ricketts and Griffin are ordered to advance their smoothbore cannon batteries to the western slope, placing them a mere 300 yards from Jackson's concealed infantry. Guarding them are the Fire Zouaves, whose bright red shirts make them dangerously conspicuous targets. This move proved fatal. While Union cannons were placed 300 yards away, Confederate rifled muskets possessed a lethal range of 1,000 yards. Consequently, standard direct fire artillery tactics were instantly rendered obsolete. Exposed and outranged, the Union artillerymen were utterly decimated by infantry fire they could not effectively return, shifting the battle's momentum. We now witness the brutal culmination of the battle, the climax in hand-to-hand combat between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. A catastrophic mistake seals the Union's fate. Due to rampant uniform confusion, Captain Griffin holds his fire, mistaking advancing Confederates for Union reinforcements, which allows his vital artillery pieces to be captured. Desperate to reclaim them, McDowell orders a series of piecemeal assaults, throwing 13 separate Union regiments into uncoordinated frontal attacks, only to see them repulsed one by one. Concurrently, a fierce cavalry clash erupts. The 11th New York Fire Zouaves engage in savage, close-quarters combat to repel a charge by the Confederate Black Horse Cavalry, signaling the chaotic collapse of the Union line. We arrive at the definitive breaking point of the battle, 4 p.m., the flank collapse at Chin Ridge. In a final bid for victory, Union General Oliver Howard moves his brigade to Chin Ridge, attempting to outflank Jackson's stubborn stronghold on Henry Hill. But timing proves catastrophic. Precisely as Howard attacks, the final wave of Johnston's Shenandoah Valley reinforcements, led by Kirby Smith and Arnold Elzey, disembark from the Manassas Gap trains. They slam directly into Howard's completely exposed flank. The sudden, overwhelming impact shatters the Union line. Seizing the moment, Beauregard orders a general advance along the entire front, turning the Union retreat into a panicked, historic rout. And so, the day culminates in the chaotic aftermath known as the Great Skedaddle, at 4:30 p.m. What began as an orderly Union retreat, calmly screened by U.S. regulars, quickly dissolved into absolute disaster. A well-placed Confederate artillery shell overturned a wagon on the Cub Run Bridge, instantly choking off the primary escape route to Centerville. Panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers cast aside their weapons to wade through the creek, while fleeing congressmen and civilian picnickers were swept up in the frantic, disorganized flight. Yet, despite the total collapse of the Union line, the exhausted and equally disorganized Confederate forces failed to launch an organized pursuit, bringing a chaotic end to the war's first major trial. Welcome to the anatomy of a Union disaster. General McDowell's defeat boils down to 4 fatal flaws. First, he squandered his numerical advantage by committing troops piecemeal rather than in massed waves. Second, he demanded too much from green, 90-day volunteers, forcing them into an overly complex 12,000-man night flank march they simply couldn't execute on time. Third, his obsolete doctrine placed direct fire artillery within 300 yards of modern, devastatingly accurate rifled muskets, wiping out his own guns. Finally, the Confederacy weaponized a strategic railroad, rapidly shifting 10,000 reinforcements from the Shenandoah Valley Strait to the decisive point at Manassas Junction. Tactical rigidity met modern mobility, and the result was a textbook catastrophe. Let's step back to examine the strategic macro view, the impact on grand strategy. The shockwaves of Bull Run forced a massive Union pivot. Recognizing the war would not be won in 90 days, President Lincoln appointed General George B. McClellan to command, tasking him with forging the chaotic volunteer mobs into a highly disciplined, professional fighting force. Simultaneously, the Union embraced the Anaconda Plan as its definitive grand strategy. Abandoning hopes of a quick, bloodless victory, the North dug in for a total war of attrition, initiating a massive naval blockade to strangle Confederate trade and preparing a multi-theater offensive to systematically split and crush the Southern Rebellion.